So, the first time I recorded this video or tried to record this video, it ended up turning into something of a rant. So I kind of went, no, you know what? We're going to back off. And no, it wasn't a rant against Star Citizen or against Chris Roberts. It was it was a rant where basically I was talking about video games in general and how they've devolved over the years. Even video games that we know and that we play that have extended for many years, how they've lost their magic. And well, you know what? I'm going to take a second try at it. So here is how Chris Roberts is 100% right. So, where Chris Roberts is 100% right. Now, recently we've done so many videos talking about fuel, talking about travel time and its possible impacts on you as a player. And you know, every once in a while when we're players, we even slip it into the conversation. I don't know, maybe they'll tame, the travel time a little bit. The fuel thing I've always found a little bit restrictive. My personal point of view on the fuel cost thing is a little bit on the restrictive side. I'm not 100% loving the idea. I can see some possible benefits to it. I can see some interesting ways that it could be relevant, or not relevant. Relevant is the wrong word. It could allow players to develop interesting communities based around star systems or planetary systems, certainly, where people, because of that fuel requirement, because the ships they have, they become very much, I'm a citizen of the Crusader area, I'm a citizen of the Hurston area, and they do things a little different over there. There could be some weird evolutionary changes to the way certain groups play because of who they're exposed to. I'd very much like to see how that all comes together. But when it comes down to travel time, I find myself 100% in agreement with Chris Roberts on, these, what some people might call these crazy travel times in between, destinations in the Star Citizen universe. And, for one, it does lend to immersion. It does. But I think that there's an intangible hidden behind that. And I wanted to kind of address that. When you have to make these long ass trips, you have to have a plan, because obviously this much time spent traveling between one spot and another, you've got to be more invested in what you're doing, especially if you want this trip, if you want this gameplay to end successfully for you. You have to be much more invested. You have to plan ahead and start to think about what I'm going to do. You don't just go, oh, let's see what's over the next hill, and I'm just going to hop in my Caterpillar and fly it solo. No, because at any point in the live game, at any point on this journey, I could be interdicted out of space. Now, we've talked about ways that you might kind of, cut around that, but it's still a possibility. So I would have to think, okay, I'm going from Crusader to Microtech. What do I need to bring with me? Well, first of all, probably at least some NPCs to man the guns in my ship. Probably a good idea to have, if I don't have the players, that is, get also an NPC to man the engineering post, so that if I start to take damage, they can rearrange the shields so that I get more value out of them, more value out of their hit points. The shield hit, recharge is going to the right shield facing as much as possible, that sort of thing. There's a lot of things to think about. Do I have a confirmed, like a really good price for the goods that I'm moving to that destination? Or am I really going there with a purpose that's going to generate money? Because obviously I'm now burning money as fuel. Am I going there for the right reason? It creates that level of investment in what you're doing. It makes it purposeful, not just a flight of fancy. Another thing that it does, and certainly you're seeing it now, and that's very purposefully why I recorded this footage the way I did, which is, these long trips are obviously going to be, for some, extremely boring. They're going to look at this, they're going to see this, and they're going to go, oh my God, this is the reality of Star Citizen. Traveling between planets is like this. That's totally not the game for me. And that's a good thing. That is a great thing. Now, I'm sure that there are people out there who are going to look at the metrics and be like, oh, well, player enjoyment over here was really high, and player enjoyment over here was really high, but player enjoyment through this warp thing just wasn't really all that high. So if we can curtail that, we can just make a much more enjoyable experience, and I've got the metrics to prove it. And what it does is when you have a system like this, you have to be invested to deal with this, right? You have to be invested to, put yourself through this to a certain degree. It requires a certain type of player to kind of go in for this sort of thing. And that's the type of player that you want. You don't want the person who's in there pew pew, shooty shooty, thinking that, everything should just be an insta-queue into action and then, shooting things up and then dip out. You don't want that type of system in the game, because you want the type of players around you who are going to be invested in what they're doing, who are going to care about what they're doing, because they realize that now all of a sudden there are very real consequences and there are things on the line, and so chances are you're more likely going to get the player who respects that, or at least understands it. Now, originally when I recorded this video, at this point I kind of launched into this whole tirade about how sometimes creating these player experiences or trying to kind of bring these moments of greatness together into moments of greatness, it dilutes the experience, and it really, I think it doesn't make a better player. I think it makes a worse player, in fact, when you design games around that sort of metric system. And I kind of used the Dungeon Finder and WoW example, but then it kind of turned into, a whole other story. And so I'm going to use a different example for this. Many of you are probably very familiar with Star Trek, right? Many of you probably enjoyed things like TNG, Deep Space Nine, the original series movies, some of the Next Generation movies, or one in particular. And, you've seen the way that show kind of evolved over its span. And then the new movies came out. Around about 2009, I think, was the first one that came out, and then the second one came out. When I saw the first one in 2009, it represented a big shift in what I was used to. But I kind of said, you know what? They're trying to establish themselves. They're trying to make a big splash. They're trying to establish themselves as the legitimate front of Star Trek now for viewers. So I'm going to give this movie a pass. I'm going to say, there were some good parts. There were some parts that were serious eyebrow raisers, and I kind of was like, I don't know about that. But I was like, you know what? I'll give it a chance. The next movie comes out. The next movie is just a series of, just epic moment to 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 exposition. Oh my God, he's actually Khan. Epic moment, epic moment, epic moment, epic moment. Action sequence, action sequence, action sequence, all the way to the end. And, in seeing that, I realized that this was very much manufactured. That that kind of, these moments where they kind of build up the drama, and where they take you through the story and the thought process, and why are we doing this, and is this right? That classic kind of Star Trek kind of moral quandary type thing, where they're dealing with that, and instead they were just trying to throw action sequence at you, phasers, photon torpedoes, people getting sucked down to space, wah. And it basically turned it into sci-fi porno. It's like the plot is entirely secondary. Let's just get to the action. And when I, in subsequent viewings of those films, I've always kind of looked at them and said, the actors who are playing the roles are actually doing a pretty damn good job. I like what they're doing with how they're portraying the characters, but the problem is that the material that's written for them is not worthy of their performance. I always kind of felt that about those movies, that if they went a different route, if they didn't just go like bam, 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 but if they really gave these people something to work with, something really good, then they could have made a better movie. But then of course there would be the metrics, well, those movies never did all that well, comparatively to other big blockbusters, and we want the big blockbuster, so we want the big action sequence. But it never really suited Star Trek tonally, so I don't think that in the end it would have worked, despite the fact that obviously there were marketing people who said, oh yeah, it can totally work. You just gotta, you gotta have more photon torpedoes, just more photon torpedoes. And I think that, kind of stepping back into the game now, that drive to always create, all these, these great and epic moments, I think it just dilutes the entire experience and just turns it into just a mess. Whereas where you get these kind of moments, as players, that we look at them and we say, oh, someone's going to look at this sequence of me traveling through space, going from one planet to another, just looking at the exterior of my ship. And they're going to say, oh, this is terrible, this is boring, this is awful. How is this really a game? And realistically, that's not the player that you want playing the game. You want the player who's invested in the world, who cares about the world and what happens in it, And so, even though it might seem counterintuitive to making money, I think long term, it's what pans out better for the game's health. Certainly, to use the World of Warcraft example, we can kind of see the effects of that, today. In a game that, when it was at its more difficult, when it was at its more challenging, and when players didn't know what was around every bend, and there was a lot of discussion, how do you do this, how do you do that, that game saw its meteoric rise. But then when they started putting in all these convenience features like Dungeon Finder and so on and so forth, that's when the game really started to kind of fall apart. They've proven that they have an audience. Certainly whenever they come out with a new expansion, it sells very well, but they can never retain that audience because in the end they always go for the easy way out, right? Whereas, with Star Citizen, you're starting with something new and you're starting with something fresh, and I think it's important to have those cautionary tales off to the side, so that when people start arguing, oh, make quantum faster, make fuel take you anywhere you want to go and just make it infinite. Your ship just refuels as it travels through quantum, so you don't need any more quantum fuel. No, I think that something like that would be entirely game breaking. Could fuel values be tweaked a little bit? Should players have a certain amount of agency over how much fuel their ship consumes? Absolutely, but I think players would have to then lean into the game and work a little bit harder in the game to figure these things out and then reap the benefits themselves, rather than just arbitrarily knocking the fuel values down for everything just to make it all a little bit more pedestrian and a little bit easier. So creating a system like this where the travel time is simply the travel time, that's just, the reality of the situation, I'm fine with that. And certainly fuel requirements, the way it is right now in the current PTU, though it is very difficult to tinker with, where you can purchase a different quantum drive, which lowers your fuel consumption, obviously at the expense of something else. But when you put that level of responsibility for the experience into the player's hands and say, if you go and you take these extra steps, and if you stop and say, you know what, I'm going to get that more efficient quantum drive, and then in the future, maybe through subcomponents or players' ability to tweak various modules, I can then go with my own skill and enhance that system and make that system a little bit more livable for me. Then I feel that, at least in the fuel consumption realm, I think that that's the right way to go. I think where you force a player to be invested in what they're doing and to study and to learn and to develop themselves as a player, and as a consequence, certain things become a little bit easier, yes. But arbitrarily just making things shorter or making things easier just to kind of, appeal to the masses, I think is a bad idea, because when you try to cater a game towards a very casual audience, you never really realize that audience is by its very nature transient, and they're always going to eventually just say, oh, well, Red Dead's out, so see you in 6 months if I ever come back. Oh, this is going to be the next big game, so I'm going to go play Fortnite now. When you're trying to capture that audience, you're chasing something that you're never going to be able to hold on to. It's like trying to hold water in your hands. It's always leaking out in between your fingers and whatnot. You can never really hold on to it for a long time, or it evaporates away. Anyways, I think that that's been enough of a ramble for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and thanks for watching.
Thank you for watching. So if you want to keep up with the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42's development, please follow us on our social media channels. See you soon.